The scroll beneath the sand, the parchment of James, the brother of Jesus, a mystery about an ancient antiquity. Episode 1, Shadows in Cairo. Chapter 1. Arrival in the land of the pharaohs. The Egyptian sun blazed overhead as Richard Trent stepped off the plane at Cairo International Airport. Even in early November, the city's heat and swirl of dust could catch newcomers unprepared. But Richard was no stranger to Cairo. As a former Scotland Yard detective turned independent investigator specializing in art and antiquities fraud, he had crisscrossed the globe more times than he cared to remember. Yet something about Egypt always set his pulse racing. Perhaps it was the tang of ancient history in the air, or the promise of hidden treasures waiting to be unearthed. He let out a slow breath, scanning the bustling terminal. Men in linen suits shepherded families weighed down with luggage. Tourists in shorts and T-shirts gawked at the decor featuring golden pharaohs and hieroglyphic motifs. Above it all, a faint undercurrent of commotion. Merchants hawking wares, the echo of car horns, and that intangible hum of the city's ancient magic. Richard was here on a peculiar mission. An old friend, Dr. Sophie Ashton, a prominent British historian who specialized in early Christian manuscripts, had urgently contacted him. "I have something that might interest you, something about an ancient parchment, possibly by James, the brother of Jesus," she had said over the phone. And the seller claims it reveals a startling account that could shake the foundations of Christian history, especially about Paul. But there's reason to believe it might be fake. I need your expertise and your discretion. He had accepted immediately. Handling potential forgeries was practically his calling card, particularly for high-stakes artifacts rumored to be worth millions. And an alleged text by James the Just, Jesus' own brother, with possibly incendiary statements about Paul the Apostle. Theologically explosive, historically priceless. If genuine, it was the kind of discovery that would make front-page headlines across the globe. If false, it would be the most masterful con since the Gospel of Jesus' wife fiasco years ago. Sophie had arranged for someone named Amir Khalil, a local antiquities dealer, somewhat shady but with valuable connections, to collect Richard from the airport. So, with a single carry-on bag that contained his laptop, notepad, and a few changes of clothes, Richard walked into Arrivals. A tall man with neatly trimmed hair and a pressed grey suit held up a sign. Mr. Trent. Richard approached him, clearing his throat to catch his attention. "I'm Richard Trent." The man lowered the sign and offered a polite bow of the head. "A pleasure, Mr. Trent. I'm Amir Khalil." A quick handshake revealed the man's hands to be smooth but firm. He had an unsettling calm, the kind that often masked a cunning mind. "Shall we?" Khalil said. "We have a car waiting." They made their way through the swirling crowd. Outside, the late afternoon light bled into a streaky orange sky as drivers jockeyed for position in the chaotic lanes of traffic. Khalil's car was a black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows, an uncommon luxury in a city where battered taxis dominated the roads. Once they were inside and on the move, Richard turned to the dealer. "I appreciate you picking me up. Sophie said you'd fill me in on the details. How did you come across this parchment?" Khalil's lips quirked into a half smile. "Let's just say I have connections in the marketplace. A man came to me, claiming he had something of great importance, something that would fetch a staggering sum at auction, but he was, how to put this, uncertain about the best channel to sell it. People in my line of work are known for, helping to facilitate certain transactions." "And you believe this might be genuine?" Richard pressed. "Let's say I'm open to the possibility. The man who brought it is no fool. He showed me just enough to pique my interest. Some Aramaic text, a partial reference to James, a mention of Paul. But am I convinced it's real?" "Not yet." He paused, eyeing Richard. "That's where you come in, Mr. Trent. Your expertise could help us ascertain authenticity or confirm a fraud. Either way, this is big. Potentially very big. Richard felt a familiar jolt of anticipation. What's the asking price? Khalil let out a low laugh. He's hinting at 7 figures, maybe 8 if proven genuine. The figure momentarily took Richard's breath away. His voice came out steady, though. That's not unusual for a one-of-a-kind early Christian manuscript, especially one attributed to a direct relative of Jesus. Quite. We're almost there. We'll speak further in my office. Khalil shot Richard another inscrutable glance. Outside, Cairo's streets were a tapestry of donkey carts, honking cars, and pedestrians weaving in and out. Towering billboards advertised smartphones, soft drinks, and the latest tourist packages to the pyramids. Every so often they passed a centuries-old mosque or an ornate colonial building from the 19th century, reminding Richard of Cairo's layered history. Finally, the car rolled to a stop in front of a modest building near Zamalek. A sign in Arabic and English read, Khalil and Associates, Antiquities and Art Consulting. Inside, the reception area was tastefully decorated with Coptic icons on the walls and a row of chairs beside a glass coffee table laden with pamphlets. Khalil led Richard through a private corridor into a back office lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. Papyrus fragments, small statuettes, and vintage maps filled the shelves, each presumably tied to some deal or negotiation. "We'll speak in here," Khalil said, gesturing to a wooden desk. "Please, sit. I'll have coffee brought in." Richard lowered himself into a chair. Moments later, a young assistant served thick, dark Arabic coffee in delicate cups. Its rich aroma filled the air. After the assistant departed, Khalil locked the door, an indication that what was about to transpire was not for prying ears. "All right, Mr. Trent," he said, settling behind the desk. "We've set up a meeting for you to see the Parchment in 2 days. The owner is an individual named Ahmed Syed, a collector of sorts, not well known, but rumored to have ties to certain unscrupulous tomb raiders. He insists on secrecy, because if this is real, he fears the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities will clamp down hard on him for acquiring it illegally." Richard nodded. "Naturally. Where does Sophie fit in?" Khalil cleared his throat. "She's the academic half of this equation. She can read ancient languages and can handle some preliminary text analysis. You will handle the forensics, ink composition, papyrus dating, general authenticity checks, and any potential leads about its provenance. If the parchment is real, we'll devise a plan to authenticate it formally with international experts. If it's fake, well, that's another story. We'll want to be sure that the fraud is unmasked swiftly and quietly." Richard sipped the coffee. It was fragrant, but bitter. "So, do you have any personal feelings about it, Khalil?" "Gut instinct?" For the first time, the dealer's composure slipped, and excitement flashed in his eyes. "I've been in this business 20 years. I've seen my share of fakes. Most are crude. This one, either it's genuine or it's the best forgery I've ever encountered. I want to believe it's real. There's something about it, but we shall see." They spent the next hour discussing logistics and then parted with the agreement to reconvene in 2 days for the official meeting with Ahmed Syed. Khalil arranged for Richard to stay in a nearby hotel, a discreet mid-range establishment that catered to foreign researchers. A quiet place with private corners to think. At the hotel, Richard sprawled on the bed, mind racing. He recalled various historical references to James the Just, who led the early Jerusalem community. Some ancient sources indicated tension between James and Paul over the direction of the nascent Christian movement. Rumors had always floated that James penned additional epistles or treatises not included in the canonical New Testament. If such a document existed, and if it contained damning revelations about Paul, what might that mean for Christian history? And why would it be in Egypt? The Coptic Church had early ties to Mark and other apostolic traditions, but direct Jamesian texts were extremely rare. Sleep came eventually, with dreams filled by swirling Aramaic letters and the shadow of a robed figure handing him a brittle scroll. Chapter 2. the historian's insight. The next day, Richard awakened to the sound of the muezzin's call to prayer echoing across the city. He quickly dressed, opting for a light cotton shirt and trousers. Sophie Ashton had arranged to meet him at the Museum of Islamic Art near the Old City. From there, they planned to head to a small cafe she adored, far from the usual tourist routes. When he arrived, Sophie stood waiting under the museum's grand arch, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a loose linen dress. She was in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled into a bun and an ever-present scholarly glow in her hazel eyes. They exchanged warm greetings, long-time colleagues, though they'd never worked on a project quite so potentially earth-shaking. "Richard, you look well," Sophie said, offering a smile. He returned the compliment. "Not too dusty from the flight, I hope. You've got quite the puzzle on your hands." She nodded, face alight with curiosity. "It's extraordinary. I've spent half the night thinking of what might be in that parchment, if it's genuine. Imagine, a direct witness account from someone who grew up alongside Jesus. Not just any sibling, but James, who led the Jerusalem church after the crucifixion. There are accounts, from Eusebius and others, that James wrote letters that never found their way into the New Testament, but nothing quite like what we suspect. If it's legitimate, it might detail debates with Paul or theological disputes over Gentile inclusion. It could overturn so many assumptions about early Christianity." Richard crossed his arms, scanning the passers-by. "Which is exactly why, if it's a forgery, it's the perfect subject, controversial enough to drive up the price." Sophie shrugged. "I'm prepared for that possibility. Yet I've seen too many alleged James documents that are easily debunked. This one, something about it has drawn serious interest from reputable scholars, but we need physical evidence." They strolled to a nearby alleyway and entered a small cafe that exuded old-world charm. Carved wooden decor, mosaic lamps, and a courtyard where a fountain burbled softly. They found a quiet corner table. After ordering mint tea and some pastries, Sophie produced a leather-bound notebook. Inside were scribbled notes, half in English, half in Greek and Coptic. "These are references to the text we might see. Khalil shared a few photographs. They're not the best quality, but enough for me to see partial lines. The script is Aramaic, with some possible Hebrew or Greek marginal notes. It references Yaakov, the Aramaic form of James, and a figure who seems to be Paul, though the text uses a transliteration of the Hebrew Shaul once or twice. It's peculiar, because that's actually Paul's Hebrew name. It might indicate a specific community tradition." Richard leaned forward. "Anything that stands out as anachronistic or suspicious?" She flipped a page in her notebook. "Not yet. The paleography, shape of letters, could be consistent with the 1st century, but I'd need to see it in person. Ahmed Syed only provided me with partial glimpses, enough to lure us in." He tapped the table thoughtfully. "All right. Suppose it's real. That means it's easily worth millions, not just for the antiquity, but for the theological shockwaves it could create. There will be big players sniffing around, private collectors, universities, maybe even church authorities who don't want it public." Sophie's eyes darkened. "I know. Already there are rumors that a wealthy American evangelical group is interested, and on the other side, I've heard talk that certain academic circles in Europe want to sponsor an official purchase to house it in the British Library." "That's precisely why we need to be careful," said Richard. "We should keep an eye on Khalil. He's savvy, but if someone offers him the right price, he might do anything." She agreed, sipping her tea. "Tomorrow we meet at Khalil's office and proceed to meet Syed at a secret location. That's all I know. Are you ready?" Richard gave a grin that barely masked his own anxiety. "I was born ready for this sort of puzzle. Let's just hope we're not dancing into a trap." Sophie smiled back. "Then let's finalize our plan and keep our eyes open." They spent the next hour hammering out details, how they'd handle negotiations, what tests Richard would perform on site, and how they'd maintain a low profile to avoid tipping off the local authorities or unscrupulous rivals. By the time they parted, the sun was high, and the city was abuzz with life. Richard felt that old, exhilarating mixture of anticipation and caution that always accompanied a major find. Chapter 3. Tensions brewing. The night before the big meeting, Richard could hardly sleep. He passed the evening reading up on known James texts, canonical and apocryphal, and brushing up on his knowledge of papyrology. Ink composition from the 1st century would contain distinct ratios of carbon and metallic elements compared to later periods. That was one of the simplest ways to detect forgeries, though advanced methods would require lab equipment. Still, a small portable kit could do some preliminary checks. Early the next morning, he made his way to Khalil and Associates. The humidity weighed heavily, and the city seemed restless, as if anticipating a storm. On the drive, Richard noticed a pair of young men riding a motorcycle that seemed to trail behind his taxi for several blocks. A coincidence? Possibly. But in this line of work, caution was second nature. He casually noted the bike's license plate and asked the taxi driver to make a sudden turn down a side street. The motorcycle roared past, continuing on. He shook off the jitters, attributing it to the tension of the day. Upon entering Khalil's office, he found Sophie already there, dressed in a tailored blouse and trousers, her expression tense but excited. Khalil was behind his desk, phone in hand, speaking quickly in Arabic. When he noticed their arrival, he ended the call and stood. "My friends, a slight complication," Khalil said, voice hushed. "Ahmed Syed has insisted on changing the meeting location. He's worried about being followed." Richard exchanged a look with Sophie. "Where to now?" Khalil exhaled. "A warehouse near the outskirts of the city, along the road to Al-Fayoum. He says it's secure. We have no choice if we want to see the parchment. The good news is that he agreed to let you bring your kit, Mr. Trent, to do some initial tests." Sophie frowned. Why the sudden change? Ahmed is skittish. Perhaps he knows others are interested. But we can't let that deter us. Let's go. A tense drive ensued. They skirted the city, merging onto less congested roads. Eventually, the urban sprawl gave way to more arid surroundings, dotted with half-completed buildings and dusty lots. Sophie kept glancing behind them, as though expecting to see a trail of cars. "Relax," Khalil said. "Even if someone's following, Ahmed has men stationed at the warehouse. No one gets in without his approval." Richard wasn't so sure. He'd seen high-stakes deals devolve into chaos more times than he cared to remember, but he kept silent. At last, they reached a squat concrete structure encircled by a chain-link fence. A lone guard opened the gate after a brief exchange with Khalil. They parked near a side entrance and stepped out into the scorching sun. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, with crates stacked along the walls. The floor was mostly empty, except for a makeshift table and chairs set up in the center. Two armed men stood off to the side, wearing casual clothes but carrying visible pistols. Ahmed Syed was a wiry man, perhaps in his late 50s. A salt and pepper beard framed his narrow face. He wore a crisp white shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers. He greeted Khalil in Arabic, then turned to Sophie and Richard with a swift, searching gaze. "So you are the experts?" His English was good, with only a faint accent. Sophie extended her hand. "Doctor?" "Sophie Ashton, historian. This is Mr. Richard Trent, forensic specialist for antiquities." Ahmed nodded curtly, ignoring Sophie's hand. "Fine. Shall we get on with it?" Richard noticed Sophie bristle at the slight, but she kept her cool. They walked to the table. On it lay a wooden box, about the size of a small briefcase, wrapped in cloth. Ahmed unwrapped it carefully, then opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a parchment fragment, larger than Richard expected, around the size of a large letter envelope. It was rolled, but partially unspooled, to reveal lines of brownish-black ink. Even in the dim light, Richard could see the faint lines of Aramaic script, each character carefully drawn. Sophie inhaled sharply, stepping closer. "May I?" she asked. With Ahmed's nod, she reached for the parchment, her gloved hands trembling with eagerness. She gently unrolled it, exposing more lines. Her eyes scanned the text. Meanwhile, Richard opened his portable kit, a small magnifier, swabs, and chemical reagents for a preliminary ink test. Ahmed cleared his throat. Be careful. Of course, Richard said softly. He examined the edges, the texture, the layering of the papyrus fibers. Under the magnifier, he could see a faint pattern of horizontal and vertical strips typical of ancient papyrus. He took out a tiny swab, collecting a minuscule sample of the ink from a corner where a letter was already faded. I'll run a quick test, he explained. It won't be conclusive, but if there's anything obviously modern, we'll know. Ahmed didn't reply, but his stance suggested tension. Sophie was still reading, her expression shifting from intense focus to astonishment. She looked up. It references Paul, Shaul. There's a line here. He who persecuted the holy ones now claims the way for himself. And it's addressed from someone named Yaakov, stating his authority as the brother of the Lord. That's extremely direct. Usually, James is referred to as the brother of the Lord in a third-person sense by outside sources. But here, it's a first-person claim. Khalil listened, his face betraying awe. So it's consistent with a James authorship? Sophie nodded slowly. Potentially. The theology is… It criticizes Paul's approach to the Gentiles, suggests that only those who keep the entire law of Moses truly follow the Messiah. That aligns with some of the tensions known from the Book of Acts and certain Pauline letters. But it's more severe here, almost an admonition that Paul is twisting the message. Richard heard excitement creeping into Sophie's voice. That would be a bombshell, he commented, glancing at Khalil. It undermines the unity of the early church narrative. From across the table, Ahmed's eyes glittered. That is why I'm certain it's valuable. Now, your test? He looked impatient. Richard applied a reagent to the swab in a small, collapsible dish. He watched for color changes. After a minute, the reagent remained pale. No obvious sign of modern artificial inks, like synthetic dyes. That's a good sign, but not definitive. Ahmed nodded. Good. Then we will proceed to the next step. I have a buyer offering $3 million, but that's before official authentication. I suspect the price could double if proven genuine. If you, Dr. Ashton, can vouch for its authenticity, and you, Mr. Trent, confirm the materials are ancient, we can talk bigger numbers. Khalil interjected. We'll need more thorough analysis, Ahmed. This is not a quick job. Carbon dating, paleographic study under proper lab conditions. I understand, Ahmed said curtly, but do not delay too long. Time is money. Just then, one of Ahmed's armed men approached, murmuring something in Arabic. Ahmed's eyes flickered with concern. It seems we have company, a vehicle parked down the road. Richard tensed. Expecting anyone? Ahmed shook his head. Number, we should conclude this meeting. Sophie carefully rolled the parchment back into the wooden box, face flushed with excitement. We'll need to make arrangements for further testing, someplace safe. Ahmed looked at her. We'll meet again soon. In the meantime, do not discuss this with anyone. Understood? Khalil nodded solemnly, then motioned for Richard and Sophie to head for the exit. They passed by the armed men, who eyed them warily. Outside, the heat felt suffocating, but they reached the car in silence. Khalil's driver sped off, leaving the warehouse behind. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. It looks so authentic. The script, the theological nuances. It's not some random medieval text. If it's a forgery, it's masterful. Richard exhaled, leaning back in the seat. This is going to get complicated. And he had no idea just how complicated it would become. Episode 2. A Test of Faith and Fidelity. Chapter 1. Whispers of Danger. Early the next morning, Richard sat in Khalil's office again, drumming his fingers on the polished wooden table. Outside, the city roared as usual. Car horns, vendor shouts, prayers resonating from minarets. Yet in this cramped office, a heavy silence reigned. Sophie was examining the partial photographic images she'd snapped on her phone at the warehouse. Khalil paced restlessly. "Who else knows about this?" Richard asked, looking pointedly at Khalil. Khalil stopped pacing. "Only those with direct involvement. Me, Sophie, you, Ahmed, his men, possibly a few others in Ahmed's close circle." Sophie frowned, not looking up from her phone. "But if a vehicle was stalking us out there, it suggests others are onto this. Word travels fast in the Antiquities underworld." Khalil smoothed his tie nervously. "Unfortunately, yes. There's a rumor swirling among local dealers about a sensational Christian text. And then there's the rumor in academic circles. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing with inquiries, though I've remained vague." Richard shifted in his chair. "If someone's trying to intercept this parchment, perhaps to buy it or to steal it, that complicates everything." Sophie locked her phone, placing it on the table. "We need a safe place to analyze it properly. The longer we wait, the greater the risk Ahmed or someone else might do something rash. And if it is real, can we trust Ahmed not to sell it to a shady billionaire collector, never to be seen again?" Khalil pursed his lips. "He wants money, yes, but he also wants a credible authentication to boost the price. He'll cooperate for now." Richard ran a hand through his hair. "All right, then let's expedite. We can do a more thorough test with a handheld X-ray fluorescence analyzer, which might be available at the local university if we can get official access. That would give us a better idea about the ink composition." Sophie brightened. "I can reach out to a contact at the American University in Cairo, Dr. Hadia Farouk. She's a leading papyrologist and might have the equipment, but I have to be careful with how much I reveal." Khalil nodded. "Handle it discreetly. If she's trustworthy, we can bring her on board. Meanwhile, I'll try to keep Ahmed from going underground." With that plan in mind, Richard and Sophie left for the university. During the ride, they reviewed their next steps, aware that every move carried risks. At the university's gate, security checks were minimal, thanks to Sophie's academic credentials. She led the way across a modern campus courtyard into a building labeled Department of History and Egyptology. Dr. Hadia Farouk's office was on the fourth floor, its door lined with posters of archaeological digs. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length black hair and a welcoming smile. Sophie introduced Richard, and after a round of polite pleasantries, Hadia invited them to sit. "So, Sophie, you mentioned you needed a portable XRF analyzer," Hadia asked, arching an eyebrow. "Might I ask for what purpose?" Sophie gave a calculated smile. "We're researching an ancient Christian manuscript of uncertain origin. We want to do a non-destructive analysis of the ink composition to help date it." Hadia leaned forward, intrigued. "Christian manuscript? Something new from the desert? The Coptic or Greek tradition?" Sophie hesitated, glancing at Richard. "We can't share too many details yet. It might be a major discovery or a highly sophisticated forgery. We need your discretion." Hadia's gaze sharpened with scholarly curiosity. "I understand, and I'm willing to help. But you must know that the university has strict protocols. If I sign out the XRF device, I need accountability. The administration does not allow random checkouts for clandestine work." Richard chimed in. "We'd be grateful for any arrangement you can manage. This is time-sensitive." Hadia nodded. "I can sign it out for field research under my name if you trust me to be present during the analysis. That way, I remain responsible for the device." Sophie breathed relief. "That's acceptable. Let's do it as soon as possible." They agreed on a plan. The following morning, Hadia would accompany them to a neutral lab space or safe location, wherever they could convince Ahmed to bring the parchment. Time was pressing, so they parted quickly, with Hadia promising to keep everything confidential. Outside, the late afternoon heat still pressed down. Sophie looked pleased but worried. Hadia's reliable, but once she sees that parchment, she'll realize its significance. The rumor mill might go crazy. Richard shrugged. We have to risk it. Our job is to figure out if it's authentic. The moment we confirm it might be real, big players will swarm. We have to be prepared. Chapter 2. Backroom Deals. That evening, Khalil organized a gathering at a discreet lounge in the heart of Cairo. He told Richard and Sophie it was to discuss next steps with Ahmed Syed, but when they arrived, Ahmed was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Khalil was hosting a meeting with a different figure, Alistair Pendleton, a British antiquities broker of questionable repute. Alistair was in his late 50s, with silver hair slicked back, wearing an impeccable linen suit. His accent bespoke old-money aristocracy, and he greeted Richard like an old chum. In truth, they had clashed before. Alistair had been accused of laundering stolen artifacts from Syria, though never formally charged. "Richard, my dear boy, always a pleasure," Alistair said, offering a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And Dr. Ashton, I've heard of your scholarship." Sophie nodded coolly. "Mr. Pendleton." They all took seats in a private booth. The lounge was dimly lit, with soft music floating in the background. Khalil discreetly left them alone, presumably to let Alistair speak freely. Alistair leaned forward. "I hear there's a remarkable Christian text in Cairo. Something that could, shall we say, change the conversation about early church history." Richard's face remained impassive. "I can't imagine what you're referring to." Alistair gave a small chuckle. "Come now, let's not play coy. I just want you to know there are interested parties, very interested. Some institutions, some private. If you're part of authenticating it, your role could be quite lucrative. The owners would find themselves handsomely rewarded." Sophie bristled. "That's not how scholarship works. We're interested in truth, not payouts." "Of course, dear doctor," Alistair purred. "But in my line of work, truths often come with a price tag. And from what I hear, this truth might be inconvenient for certain religious authorities." Richard suppressed a surge of irritation. "Why are you telling us this?" "To make you aware of the stakes," Alistair replied, sipping from a tumbler of whiskey, "and to extend an olive branch. My contacts can expedite carbon dating in a private lab. No bureaucratic red tape. You'd have results in a week, not months. Imagine how that might streamline your verification." Sophie exhaled, her gaze drifting to Richard. His expression told her they were on the same page. Alistair's offer was tempting but dangerous. Privately run labs with no oversight were known for forging results to meet the sponsor's agenda. "No, thank you," Sophie said quietly. "We'll follow standard academic protocols." Alistair spread his hands in mock resignation. "As you wish. But do remember, if it's genuine, a number of powerful organizations would prefer it not see the light of day. And that's where I come in. Discretion is my specialty." Richard tried not to show alarm, but the implication was clear. Some might want to bury the text. The conversation left an uneasy chill in the air. Alistair finished his whiskey and stood. "My door is open," he said. "When you're ready." After Alistair departed, Khalil returned, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry. He practically forced this meeting, claiming he had a critical offer. I thought it best to let you handle it." Richard gave him a stern look. "Next time, warn us." Khalil held up his hands. "He's got connections. We can't afford to alienate him outright. That could be dangerous in its own way." Sophie's voice trembled with controlled anger. "We're not selling. We're verifying. The eventual sale is up to Ahmed, but we're not part of any hush money scheme." "Of course," Khalil soothed. "Just be careful. People like Pendleton can be persistent." They left the lounge more determined than ever to stick to their plan with Hadia. Still, the conversation had planted a seed of worry in Richard's mind. If the text truly contained controversial material about Paul, certain groups, religious or otherwise, might go to great lengths to see it suppressed or exploited. Chapter 3. Betrayals. The next morning, they arranged for Ahmed Syed to bring the parchment to a small lab Hadia had secured in a separate university annex, less formal than the main campus building and less likely to attract attention. Ahmed agreed, albeit warily, primarily because Khalil assured him it would accelerate the authentication process. Richard arrived first, setting up the portable XRF device under Hadia's supervision. It was a suitcase-sized apparatus, somewhat heavy, but capable of analyzing the elemental composition of samples without damaging them. Sophie hovered nearby, still poring over her notes and the partial translations she had attempted. Ahmed arrived half an hour late, accompanied by a single armed guard. He carried the parchment in a nondescript plastic bag. Before letting them open it, he scoured the room suspiciously, checking windows and doors. "This place is secure?" he demanded. Hadia nodded calmly. "There are no cameras, and the staff is minimal. Only we four are present." Ahmed finally withdrew the wooden box containing the parchment. With trembling hands, Sophie and Richard carefully transferred the scroll to the lab table. They all donned gloves. Hadia, wide-eyed, leaned in for a closer look. "My goodness," she whispered. "The script. Definitely Aramaic. This could be 1st century, or it might be an exceptional forgery." Richard gently positioned the XRF apparatus to scan a small area of the text. Hadia typed in commands on the connected laptop. As the machine hummed and beeped, everyone waited with bated breath. "It's analyzing the elemental composition," she explained. "If there's anachronistic ink, like modern pigments containing titanium dioxide or synthetic binders, we'll see it." Time crawled. After 5 minutes, Hadia reviewed a chart of spectral lines, her brow furrowed. "So far, I see mainly carbon-based ink. There's some iron content, likely from iron gall. This was used historically, though iron gall typically emerged more prominently in the medieval period. But it's not necessarily unusual for older texts if the scribe used certain ink recipes. We'd need more thorough data to confirm exact composition." Ahmed's impatience flared. "So, is it authentic or not?" Hadia sighed. "It's consistent with older ink formulas. Nothing here screams modern, but that doesn't prove authenticity beyond a shadow of a doubt. Papyrology is complicated." Sophie piped up. "Let me see the fibers more closely." She used a digital microscope attached to Hadia's laptop. After a few moments, she pointed at the screen. "Look here, the layering pattern. This is definitely papyrus, possibly from the right region. But we'd want a radiocarbon test to confirm the date. That can't be done right here." Ahmed glowered. "And how long would that take?" "If we expedite it at a reputable lab, maybe a few weeks," Hadia said. "That's the standard. But results can sometimes come sooner with the right connections." Ahmed's guard muttered something in Arabic, which Richard couldn't catch. Ahmed's expression darkened further. "I don't have weeks." Richard frowned. "Why the rush?" Ahmed hesitated. "I have my reasons. Let us say I have certain debts to settle. This parchment is my golden goose, but only if it's proven real." Sophie placed a hand gently on the table. "If you sell it before proper authentication, you might not get the full value. Patience could mean millions more." Ahmed's frustration was palpable, but he nodded slowly. "Very well. I will give you 1 week. After that, I find my own solution." It was an ultimatum that left no room for debate. He motioned to his guard, who stepped forward. Gently, they collected the parchment back into its box. "I'm keeping it with me," Ahmed said. "No one touches it unless I'm present." Richard and Sophie exchanged concerned glances. Hadia intervened softly. "But we need samples for carbon dating." Ahmed's stance shifted. "Fine. A small fiber from the edge. No more." He nodded at his guard, who carefully let Hadia trim a near-invisible sliver from an already damaged corner of the papyrus. With that done, Ahmed signaled the end of the session. He swept out of the lab, guard in tow, leaving the rest of them standing in tense silence. Hadia finally spoke. "I'll send this sample to a lab I trust in Germany, Munich specifically. They can do a rush job for me. Let's see what they say." Sophie smiled weakly. "Thank you, Hadia. We owe you." Hadia brushed it off. "I just hope this text, if real, sees the light of day. It's potentially of immense historical value." Richard gave her a grateful nod, but in his mind he replayed Ahmed's parting words. 1 week. That ticking clock hammered in his thoughts like a slow drumbeat of impending conflict. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Desert. That evening, Richard and Sophie reconvened at a quiet rooftop restaurant, hoping a change of scenery might ease their stress. The city sprawled below in a tapestry of glowing lights, while a gentle breeze drifted across the terrace. They sipped hibiscus tea, both lost in thought. Finally, Sophie spoke. "If it's real, and that's a big if, the theological implications are enormous. James would be directly criticizing Paul's teachings, maybe casting him as an outsider who misunderstood Jesus' message." Richard folded his arms on the table. Many biblical scholars acknowledge tension between James and Paul, but the canonical texts don't show them as outright enemies. This might rewrite the story, or at least add detail. Traditional churches might see it as an attack on the New Testament's unity. Evangelical groups could claim it's a heresy or a forgery. The Catholic Church might demand further study, but quietly fear the controversy. Sophie nodded. It could confirm theories that the early Jesus movement was more Jewish in practice, and that Paul's more liberal stance on Gentiles created a schism. Richard studied her face, noticing the mix of excitement and dread. "You okay?" She exhaled, forcing a small smile. "I'm torn. As a historian, this is the find of a lifetime. As someone who grew up in a devout family, it's unsettling." He reached across, giving her hand a quick squeeze. "We'll handle it with care. If it's real, truth should come out, no matter how uncomfortable." She squeezed back. "Thank you, Richard." A moment of quiet connection passed between them. Then Richard's phone buzzed. He checked the caller ID. It was Khalil. "We should answer," he said, stepping aside to take the call. Khalil's voice sounded tense. "Richard, you need to know something. I just received information that Alistair Pendleton has been in contact with Ahmed. He's trying to broker a deal behind our backs, promising immediate cash if Ahmed forfeits the verification process. Ahmed might be tempted if his debts are dire." Richard felt a cold knot in his stomach. "Thanks for letting me know. We'll talk tomorrow. Keep me updated." He returned to Sophie's side, explaining the situation. Her face paled. "If Pendleton buys it outright and smuggles it to a private collector, the world may never see it, and we'll never know the truth." Richard nodded gravely. "We have to move quickly, or this entire project could vanish." Chapter 5. Flight into mystery. That night, a restless sleep overcame Richard. He dreamed of old scrolls crumbling in his hands, fading away before he could read them. He woke before dawn to a frantic text from Khalil. "Emergency! Ahmed is missing." Richard jolted awake and immediately called Khalil, who picked up after 2 rings, voice strained. "Khalil, what do you mean Ahmed is missing?" "His apartment was ransacked last night. Neighbors saw men forcing him into a black SUV. There's no sign of him, or the parchment." Richard's heart pounded. "Any leads? Police involvement?" "Police? Are you joking? Ahmed has no official standing. He's a black market trader. They'll arrest him if he shows up. I'm trying to gather information from my sources, but this complicates everything." Sophie, awakened by the commotion, caught only part of the conversation but gleaned the gist. Her eyes widened in alarm. "They took Ahmed and the parchment. Richard nodded grimly. That's what it sounds like. We need to find him. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. If Ahmed and the scroll fell into the wrong hands, it might vanish forever or be destroyed. And if there was any chance of verifying the authenticity, they had to act fast. Episode 3. Secrets Under Siege. Chapter 1. The race begins. Sophie and Richard hurried to Khalil's office, where they found him pacing like a caged lion, sweat dampening his brow. He barely greeted them. "I've been calling everyone," Khalil said, voice on edge. "No one knows where Ahmed was taken. Some rumors point to a safe house outside Cairo, possibly the work of local thugs hired by a rival dealer." "Or Pendleton," Sophie added darkly. Khalil sighed. "Yes, or Pendleton. He has the resources to hire local muscle, but we don't know for sure. All we know is Ahmed's gone, and he's presumably still alive. He's valuable to them as long as he controls the parchment." Richard frowned. "We need a lead. Check all known associates of Pendleton in the region. And what about Ahmed's guard? Was he taken too?" Khalil's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, eyes narrowing. "It's one of my informants, a man named Salim," he answered, stepping aside for a moment. When he returned, he looked grim. "Salim thinks Ahmed was taken to a compound in the desert near Saqqara, some old farmland recently purchased by a foreigner, likely a front for illicit dealings." "Saqqara?" Sophie repeated. "That's about an hour south of Cairo, near the Step Pyramid. People used to dig for artifacts around there illegally." Khalil nodded. "Precisely. Many deserted spots. Perfect for hiding. If we go there, we must be prepared for trouble." Richard thought quickly. "We can't exactly storm the place. We might need some help." Sophie suggested, "What about the local authorities? We can't just go to them and say a black market dealer was kidnapped." "Exactly," Khalil cut her off. "They'd arrest us all. This is a game of shadows." Richard clenched his fists. "I'll go with you, Khalil. We'll see if we can negotiate Ahmed's release. If Pendleton is behind this, he might be open to a deal. Sophie, you stay here in case—" Sophie bristled. "Not a chance. I'm coming. This entire project is meaningless if we lose that parchment. Besides, you need someone who can read it." Reluctantly, Richard agreed. "All right, but we do this carefully." They gathered what they needed, a few $1,000s in cash for bribes, minimal gear, and a sense of growing desperation. By mid-morning, they headed out of Cairo in Khalil's Mercedes, following a dusty road lined with palm groves and half-finished buildings. Chapter 2. Desert Showdown. As they approached Saqqara, the city's clamor gave way to quieter stretches of desert. In the distance, the iconic step pyramid of Djoser rose, a reminder of the region's layered antiquity. But their destination was no tourist site. Khalil drove them down a rutted dirt track leading to a walled compound. A single metal gate blocked the way, watched by armed guards in civilian clothes. They glowered as the Mercedes pulled up. Richard leaned forward. "Let me do the talking." He rolled down the window, plastering on a confident smile. "Salam alaikum, friends. We're here to see Mr. Pendleton. We have business." The guard frowned. "No one enters without invitation." Khalil slipped $100 bill out the window. "We're expected." The guard eyed the money, then snatched it, exchanging a look with his partner. After a tense moment, the gate lurched open. They drove inside, parking near a low building. The sun glared off corrugated metal roofs. At least half a dozen armed men roamed the grounds. Once they exited the car, a tall, lean man in a white shirt approached. His eyes were cold. "Who are you?" Khalil squared his shoulders. "We've come to see Alistair Pendleton." The man spat. "He's busy." Sophie stepped forward, surprising Richard. "We have an urgent message about the parchment. Tell him that." That made the man hesitate. With a sharp gesture, he led them inside. They passed through a dim corridor, the air thick with stale cigarette smoke. At last, they entered a spacious room lit by a single overhead lamp, revealing none other than Alistair Pendleton, seated at a makeshift desk. He regarded them with cool amusement. Richard Trent, Dr. Ashton, and the resourceful Mr. Khalil. To what do I owe the pleasure? Richard glanced around. We're here about Ahmed Syed. We know you have him. Alistair gave a theatrical sigh. I do hate such blunt accusations, but let's assume I've negotiated a separate arrangement with Ahmed. He's under my protection. Sophie stepped closer. Protection? Or captivity? He was abducted. Alistair's lip curled. He's safe from others who might do him harm. I'm offering him a handsome sum for the parchment, more than enough to cover his debts. A direct deal, no complicated authentication steps that attract media or police attention. Khalil's hands balled into fists. You realize the world deserves to know the truth about this document. Alistair shrugged, unperturbed. The world deserves many things. My client, however, would prefer the item remain private. So it's not even for sale on the open market? Richard demanded. Alistair chuckled. One day it might be revealed, but that's my client's prerogative. Now, unless you have a better offer, or unless Ahmed changes his mind, I suggest you return to Cairo. Sophie's face was etched with fury. So this is a kidnapping. You're forcing him to accept your deal. A low laugh emanated from Alistair. Forcing? I merely offered protection and a large check. Ahmed is free to go if he wishes, but I doubt he wants to face his other creditors, and not all are as gentlemanly as I am. Richard exchanged a look with Sophie. This was worse than they feared. Alistair intended to vanish with the parchment. The question was, could they do anything about it? Chapter 3. Desperate negotiations. Under the watchful eyes of armed henchmen, the three were offered seats. Alistair put on a veneer of hospitality. Tea, anyone? I do like to maintain civility. No one accepted. The tension was thick enough to slice. Alistair lit a slim cigar. Now, let's see if we can find a meeting of minds. Richard leaned forward. You want money? We can get it. Big institutions will pay top dollar, possibly more than your private client. Alistair arched an eyebrow. Yes, but that money comes with strings, academic scrutiny, possibly public announcements that might undermine the text's perceived authenticity. My client isn't interested in that. He wants discretion. Sophie spoke softly, trying a different angle. Alistair, consider the academic legacy you'd leave behind if you helped us properly authenticate this. You'd be known as the broker who brought a revolutionary text to light. That's worth more than ephemeral millions. Pendleton exhaled a stream of smoke. I'm beyond vanity, my dear. At this stage, I care about solid deals. Nonetheless, let's see what Ahmed says. Bring him in. A guard opened a side door, revealing Ahmed flanked by two other men. He looked disheveled, as though he hadn't slept, but otherwise unhurt. He glared at Khalil. So you found me, Ahmed said, voice trembling with anger or fear. Richard couldn't tell which. Khalil exhaled in relief. Ahmed, we can help you get a better deal. Don't do this with Pendleton. Ahmed's eyes flickered to Alistair. He's offered me $6 million, cash, no questions asked, plus my safety from certain parties. If I give him the parchment and sign an NDA, I'd be set for life. Sophie's voice softened. Ahmed. But then the text disappears. The knowledge it contains, the potential world impact, gone. Ahmed shrugged, though his eyes betrayed conflict. I need to settle my affairs. My life is at stake. Richard tried a last-ditch argument. Let's finalize the authenticity, raise its profile, get a bidding war with museums, private collectors. You could fetch $8 million or more. Yes, it'll take a few weeks, but you'll earn a real fortune, and you won't have to hide from the authorities forever. Let us help you do this above board, or as close to above board as possible. Ahmed hesitated. Alistair's eyes narrowed. You can't trust them, Ahmed. They'll drag you into academic bureaucracy, and if it's proven fake, you get nothing. The mention of potential forgery seemed to rattle Ahmed. He stared at Richard. You're sure it's real? Your tests aren't conclusive. Richard inhaled. It's leaning that way, but we won't know until the carbon date results come in. That might be a matter of days if we can expedite it. Ahmed's expression was tortured. Days? Khalil nodded earnestly. Hadia Farouk is on it. If the results come back authentic, you'll be in a position to command top dollar from major institutions. Alistair flicked his cigar ash. And if not? Sophie squared her shoulders. If not, it's still worth something as a curiosity. But yes, the price might drop. That's the risk. Ahmed, you came to us because you believed it might be real. Silence stretched. Alistair's face hardened. Finally, Ahmed spoke, voice unsteady. I'll wait for the carbon dating results. Give me a few days, but I want partial payment up front as insurance. Alistair's fists clenched. You're making a mistake, Ahmed. Don't be swayed by illusions of grandeur. My client won't wait forever. But Ahmed was resolute. I have more options with their plan. If it fails, I can return to you. Alistair stared, then gave a slow, dangerous nod. Very well. I'll release you. But don't blame me if your test reveals a worthless forgery. Chapter 4. A Narrow Escape. The tense standoff ended with Alistair's men escorting Ahmed and the scroll, still in its wooden box, back to Khalil's Mercedes. Sophie and Richard followed, hearts hammering. Somehow, they had negotiated Ahmed's release, if only temporarily. Once in the car, Ahmed sank into the seat, clutching the box protectively. Khalil drove out of the compound without incident, but Richard kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting pursuit. When they reached a main road, Ahmed finally spoke. You've got 3 days. After that, I'm finalizing a deal with Pendleton. Fine, Sophie agreed, voice tinged with relief. Let's see what the German lab says. Richard called Hadia immediately, urging her to expedite. She promised she would do what she could to get preliminary carbon dating results in 48 hours. Back in Cairo, Ahmed insisted on a new hideout, which Khalil arranged in a secure apartment building near the Nile. Guards would be stationed discreetly. Ahmed refused to surrender the parchment to anyone, carrying it with him like a lifeline. They parted ways, with Sophie and Richard collapsing from exhaustion at their hotel. Before drifting into restless sleep, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the next 72 hours would determine everything. The fate of the parchment, the truth about its authorship, and their own personal stakes in one of the most astonishing historical mysteries of the century. Chapter 5. Theological Ripples. While waiting for test results, Sophie continued her partial translation of the photographed lines. She hunched over a small desk in Richard's hotel room, scanning her laptop screen. Listen to this, she muttered. It references a confrontation in Jerusalem, clearly the Council of Jerusalem mentioned in Acts 15. But here, James is calling Paul a traitor to the Torah, saying that he leads believers astray by letting them ignore circumcision. It's quite direct, no attempt at compromise like in the canonical story. Richard listened, fascinated. That's huge. Traditional Christian teaching frames James and Paul as eventually reconciling their views. This suggests a major rift. Sophie nodded. And there's a cryptic line about, the sign upon the mountain shall reveal the truth of the Lord. Could be an allusion to some event or a coded prophecy. I'm not sure yet. What about Jesus himself? Any references to him beyond the brother of the Lord? She shook her head. Not in the partial lines I have. Most references to Jesus are indirect, speaking of him as the rightful king of Israel. It's definitely a Jewish Christian perspective, emphasizing the law and the Messiah's lineage from David. Richard considered. If it's real, it's a glimpse into a more Jewish-oriented branch of early Christianity that often gets overshadowed by Paul's letters in the New Testament canon. Sophie's eyes were bright with excitement. It would be the earliest known text explicitly linking James to direct opposition of Paul's theology. Think of the scholarship it would generate. Yet a shadow crossed her features. Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do everything we can to preserve it." Her voice was quiet. If only that were enough. Episode 4. The Price of Revelation. Chapter 1. News from Munich. 2 days later, a phone call from Hadia jolted them into action. She sounded breathless. "Richard, Sophie, I have preliminary results from the lab in Munich." Sophie put the call on speaker. "Go ahead." Hadia's voice shook with excitement. "The papyrus fibers date from the late 1st century to early 2nd century. The margin of error is about 50 years. That places it quite possibly in the right time frame for James, though on the later edge. Still, it's far earlier than medieval or modern. The ink composition from the sample I tested also seems consistent with ancient sources. I can't give a 100% guarantee, but all signs point to it being genuinely ancient." Richard closed his eyes briefly, exhaling in relief. Sophie let out a soft cry of joy. Hadia continued. "There's always a chance it's a palimpsest or a reused papyrus, so deeper analysis is needed. But so far, it appears authentic. Congratulations." "Thank you," Sophie breathed. "This is wonderful." Richard nodded. "We'll handle the next steps carefully. Talk soon." As soon as the call ended, they exchanged a glance. Sophie's face was alight. "It's real, Richard. We still need thorough paleographic confirmation, but this is a major step." He grinned. "That means Ahmed has an artifact worth millions. He'll want to sell it fast to the highest bidder." Sophie sobered. "We need a stable environment for it, a museum or a reputable institution. Otherwise, it could vanish into a private vault." Khalil, who had joined them in the hotel suite, raised a hand. "Let's remember Ahmed calls the shots. But if we arrange a quick auction or even a direct deal with a major institution, he'd net more than from Pendleton." Richard considered. "Could we get the British Museum or the Vatican Library interested? That might make Ahmed see sense." Khalil shrugged. "They'd be interested, but official channels are complicated. The Egyptian authorities might also claim ownership, given its possible origin within Egypt. That's a legal minefield." Sophie pressed her lips together. "If the government steps in, Ahmed could lose everything. That's probably why he's avoided them." They agreed to meet Ahmed that afternoon and present the lab findings, hoping the promise of a legitimate, high-profile sale would persuade him. Chapter 2. Deals in the dark. At the secure apartment, they found Ahmed pacing anxiously. He looked thinner, as if he hadn't eaten well in days. The box sat on a table, guarded by 2 muscular men. When Sophie relayed the lab results, his expression flickered with both relief and greed. "So it's authentic," he said, eyes gleaming. "Preliminary results suggest so?" "Yes," Sophie confirmed. "This is a priceless piece of Christian history." Ahmed nodded slowly. "Well, I'm glad I waited. Now, do you have a buyer?" Khalil cleared his throat. "I can reach out to private collectors, but we'd prefer a more legitimate sale, like to a museum. You'd avoid potential legal entanglements. You might even claim a form of discovery fee." Ahmed scowled. "And risk the Egyptian government seizing it. They claim all antiquities found in Egypt are property of the state." Sophie attempted a gentle approach. "In principle, yes. But if you negotiate through recognized channels, you might receive a significant reward. Under the table, though, you'll be constantly looking over your shoulder." Ahmed bristled. "I want the highest bidder, no matter who they are. If that's a museum, fine. If it's a private collector, also fine. Just get me an offer quickly. I'm done living in fear." Richard nodded. We can discreetly notify major institutions. But what about Pendleton? Ahmed's lip curled. He offered 6 million. Now that we know it's genuine, I want 8. If he can't pay, I move on. Sophie and Richard exchanged glances. Ahmed was fully in seller mode. The ephemeral hope that he might donate it for the sake of scholarship was gone. For him, it was strictly business. All right, Khalil said, pulling out his phone. I'll start making calls. Expect interest to surge quickly. Just be prepared for the chaos. Ahmed placed a hand on the wooden box, face betraying a flash of uncertainty. Then he steeled himself. Let's make a fortune. Chapter 3. Mounting pressures. Khalil's network responded immediately. Within hours, offers began rolling in, some from well-known dealers, others from suspicious shell companies. Word spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, churches and Christian organizations also got wind of the discovery, stirring rumors of hush money to keep the text from going public. A sense of urgency pulsed through Cairo's antiquity scene. Sophie felt uneasy. While authenticity was exciting from a scholarly standpoint, the swirl of profiteers and clandestine interests threatened to bury the text's academic value under a mound of secrecy. Richard echoed her concerns. Money is overshadowing the scholarship, he muttered one evening in the hotel lounge. Sophie sighed. Yes, but we can't control the entire process. We can only ensure it's properly documented before it vanishes. At least we have the carbon dating results, photographs, partial translations. If the original disappears, we have some record. They both knew it wasn't enough. Khalil, flanked by 2 assistants, pored over emails and phone calls, systematically vetting offers. We've got a reputable Swiss foundation offering 7 million, a large American evangelical organization offering 7.5, and a hush-hush consortium from the Middle East offering potentially 8 or more. Pendleton remains in the mix as well. Ahmed's eyes danced at the mention of 8 million. Set up a meeting with them. Are you sure? Khalil asked. They're very secretive. Ahmed shrugged. As long as the money is real, I don't care. Sophie and Richard watched with concern. They had tried contacting major museums directly, but negotiations with public institutions could stretch on for months, requiring formal provenance checks. Ahmed wouldn't wait that long. In a quiet aside, Sophie whispered to Richard, "We're losing control." He nodded. We might just have to document as much as possible for scholarship. This is bigger than any one person's agenda. Chapter 4. The Silent Auction. A makeshift silent auction was arranged in a lavish hotel suite near Tahrir Square. Over a dozen potential buyers were invited under strict confidentiality. Security was tight. Ahmed hired a small army of guards. Sophie and Richard were there as the expert validators. Khalil presided over the process like a ringmaster, collecting sealed bids and verifying funds. Buyers filed in discreetly over several hours, ranging from robed Middle Eastern dignitaries to slick Western businessmen. Each was given a few minutes with the parchment under Sophie and Richard's watchful eyes before submitting a sealed envelope. Sophie felt nauseous. The parchment that could rewrite early Christian history was being treated like a prized painting. Yet she maintained professionalism, answering questions about authenticity with calm assurance. Richard demonstrated the XRF scan results on a laptop. The potential buyers listened intently, some fascinated, others purely fixated on investment. Midway through, Alistair Pendleton swept in with quiet confidence. He cast Richard a smirk. Well, well, so we're taking the high road, are we? Richard bit back a retort. This is how it's going. Good luck. Pendleton gave a mocking bow. May the best offer win. He vanished into the private viewing area, presumably to see the parchment again and confirm its authenticity. Sophie watched him like a hawk, ensuring he didn't tamper with it. He left without comment. Late into the night, Khalil gathered the sealed bids. Ahmed hovered anxiously, accompanied by two of his guards. In a hushed ceremony, Khalil opened each envelope. Sophie and Richard looked on, their hearts pounding with a mixture of dread and fascination. One by one, Khalil read off the amounts. 6.8 million, 7.2, 7.5, 8.0. The tension mounted. At last, he opened the final bid. His eyes widened. $11 million. A collective gasp. Sophie's heart skipped. Even Ahmed's guards exchanged looks of shock. Ahmed stood, stunned. Who made that bid? Khalil glanced at the label on the envelope. It's from a private group, Trinitas Holdings, registered in Luxembourg. I don't have more details. Ahmed's face broke into a triumphant grin. 11 million. Sold. Chapter 5. Revealing motives. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the suite turned electric. Word spread among the other bidders. Some stormed out in frustration, others tried to match or beat the offer, but Ahmed was adamant. I accept the highest bid. Trinitas Holdings. Done. Pendleton confronted Khalil, voice dripping with contempt. Who are these people? I've never heard of them. Khalil shrugged. They provided proof of funds, offshore accounts. Seem legitimate enough, if well concealed. Pendleton scowled, storming out. For a moment, Richard almost felt sympathy for the man who had kidnapped Ahmed. Almost. Amid the swirl, Sophie and Richard pulled Khalil aside. 11 million is huge, Sophie murmured. But do we know anything about Trinitas? Khalil shook his head. They gave references from European banks. The money is real. Richard frowned. They could be connected to the church, or a secret Christian group wanting to hide the text, or some eccentric collector who craves exclusive ownership. Hard to say. Sophie's heart sank. So it might vanish after all. Ahmed interrupted them, exhilaration in his eyes. They're wiring the money tomorrow. I'll hand over the parchment after I see proof in my account. I'm done. I'm free. Richard sighed, nodding. They had done what they could. At least let us copy and photograph the entire manuscript thoroughly. Ahmed hesitated, but the flush of victory made him generous. Fine. One condition. Do it tonight. After tomorrow, it's no longer mine to share. That night, Sophie and Richard spent hours in a separate room with the scroll, using professional cameras and scanning devices. Sophie painstakingly documented each line of text, capturing high-resolution images that future scholars could analyze if the physical artifact disappeared. She paused occasionally, reading segments aloud to Richard. Condemnation of Paul's teachings, calls for stricter adherence to Jewish customs, and cryptic references to Jesus' ministry in ways that slightly diverged from the canonical Gospels. Each line felt like a revelation and a heartbreak, knowing how easily it could be locked away. By dawn, they finished. Richard secured the digital copies on encrypted drives, backing them up to multiple locations. They returned the parchment to Ahmed, exhausted yet relieved. At least they had some record. Episode 5. Treasures Lost and Found. Chapter 1. The Final Exchange. The next day, Ahmed confirmed the funds had arrived in his account, an amount that would make him one of the wealthiest antiquities dealers in the region. He arranged to meet Trinitas Holdings' representative at a private airstrip outside Cairo for the handover. Sophie, Richard, and Khalil were not invited. Ahmed insisted on maintaining secrecy. They waited anxiously for news, each pondering the fate of the parchment. By late afternoon, Khalil's phone buzzed. A text from Ahmed. Deal done. They have it? Leaving Cairo tonight. Thanks for everything. Sophie stared at the message, numb. The artifact was gone. History had traded hands in a clandestine transaction. So that's it, she whispered. No official repository, no public display. Richard put a reassuring arm around her. We have the scans and photos. At least the knowledge won't disappear entirely. Khalil cleared his throat. If Trinitas Holdings tries to bury the text, you can still publish your findings, Dr. Ashton. The academic world will know. Sophie offered a shaky smile. Yes, I will. It's not the same as having the original, but it's something. Chapter 2. A mysterious revelation. As they packed up their gear at Khalil's office, a sudden commotion erupted at the entrance. One of Khalil's assistants rushed in. There's someone asking for Dr. Ashton and Mr. Trent. Says it's urgent. They exchanged puzzled looks. Who is it? Richard asked. A woman, middle-aged, dressed in black, claiming to represent Trinitas Holdings. She asked for you by name. Sophie and Richard hurried to the lobby, where they found a tall woman in a business suit, black hair pinned neatly, wearing tinted glasses. She introduced herself as Maria Stone. Her voice was even, almost mechanical. Dr. Ashton, Mr. Trent, I represent the acquiring party. May we speak privately? Sophie glanced at Richard, then nodded. All right. They moved into a side office. Maria Stone placed a slim folder on the table. My employers wish to thank you for your role in authenticating and documenting the manuscript. They also wish to request your discretion regarding its contents. Sophie stiffened. Meaning you want us to keep silent about our findings? Maria's face was impassive. We prefer minimal media coverage to avoid sensationalism. In return, we're prepared to offer a generous stipend for your cooperation. Richard felt anger flare. We're scholars, not mercenaries. We won't suppress academic truth. Maria Stone nodded as if expecting resistance. We respect your commitment to scholarship. My employers simply request a delay in publication until further study can be conducted under our auspices. This text could be inflammatory. We want to handle it responsibly to avoid fueling controversies or hate speech. Sophie inhaled deeply. She had anticipated some form of pressure, but this was blatant. And if we refuse? Maria's eyes never wavered. We hope you won't. But I should warn you, Ms. Ashton, that publicly releasing unverified claims about a text that might damage major religious institutions could result in personal and professional harm, lawsuits, defamation, even threats from zealots. We offer a safer path. It was veiled intimidation, dressed as concern. Sophie's hands balled into fists. We have the carbon dating, the translations, the images. We can publish in reputable journals. Of course, Maria conceded, but consider the consequences. My employers are prepared to fund an independent academic panel. You could lead it, Dr. Ashton. A significant research grant, enough to finance further textual analysis, even a multi-year project. The condition, you publish the findings under a controlled timeline, ensuring all angles are considered. Richard eyed Sophie. This was more than a bribe. It was an attempt at controlling the narrative. Sophie's expression was a swirl of conflict. On one hand, a major research grant could be beneficial, ensuring a thorough, legitimate study. On the other hand, it bound them to secrecy at the whim of an unknown entity. Sophie finally spoke, voice trembling with conviction. I need time to think. I won't sign anything today. Maria Stone slid a business card across the table. Understandable. Please contact me when you've decided. We'd like to finalize a formal agreement within a week. She departed as quietly as she arrived, leaving Sophie and Richard stunned. Chapter 3. Moral dilemmas. Back in Khalil's office, they recounted the encounter. Khalil muttered a curse in Arabic. They want to muzzle you, or at least control the publication. What are you going to do? Sophie sank into a chair, shoulders slumped. I don't know. If we refuse, we might be blacklisted or even threatened. If we accept, we become complicit in their secrecy. But at least we'd have resources to study it properly. Richard crouched beside her. We also have the power to publish right away, put the scans online for the world to see, Khalil interjected. That might provoke lawsuits. Trinitas could claim intellectual property or stolen data. The courts could block distribution. It could get messy. Sophie pressed her palms to her temples. This is so unfair. We discovered something that belongs to history, not to private interests. Richard gently squeezed her shoulder. We can't solve the entire system overnight. We can only decide what best preserves the truth. She looked up, determination flickering in her eyes. Let me think on it. We can approach some trusted academic peers for advice, people who believe in free scholarship. Or maybe we can negotiate better terms with Trinitas, ensuring eventual public release. Khalil nodded. That might be wise. Meanwhile, watch your backs. Trinitas is powerful, and Pendleton might still be nursing grudges. The moral quandary weighed on them. The text's authenticity seemed clear, its implications enormous. Yet powerful forces were at play, each seeking control. Chapter 4. Collision of Worlds. Later that evening, Sophie and Richard walked along the Nile promenade, trying to clear their heads. The water reflected the city lights in shimmering patterns. Soft breezes carried the distant honk of horns. They found a quiet bench and sat, side by side. Sophie stared at the dark river. I've dreamt of finding something like this my whole career, an undiscovered text that could reshape biblical scholarship. And now that I have, it's overshadowed by greed, secrecy, threats. Richard slipped an arm around her shoulders, hesitantly at first, then more firmly when she didn't pull away. History often is. The question is, what do we do with the knowledge we have? She sighed, leaning into him. I want to ensure it's properly studied, and I want the public to eventually know. Maybe I can draft a letter to the editor of a major journal, releasing preliminary findings. Enough to spark interest, but not enough to breach confidentiality. Yet. He nodded, thoughtful. And negotiate with Trinitas for an academic panel that includes independent scholars, ensures peer-reviewed results. That might be the middle path. She smiled, a tremor in her lips betraying emotional exhaustion. A year from now, maybe we can release a full critical edition. Meanwhile, I'll do everything I can to keep the text's authenticity safe from smear campaigns. Richard pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. Whatever path you choose, I'm with you. We've come too far to let the truth vanish. They watched the Nile flow under the moonlight, each quietly resolving to protect what they had found, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. Unanswered Questions. In the days that followed, Sophie began drafting a scholarly paper on the manuscript's language, script, and theological content. She shared her notes with a small circle of trusted academics, Hadia Farouk included, securing their vow of secrecy for now. Richard assisted in organizing the photographic archive, adding watermarks and metadata. Khalil continued receiving calls from random buyers who'd heard rumors of the text's sale, but he turned them all away, explaining it was already sold. Pendleton, too, vanished from Cairo, leaving behind only traces of his frustration. Through a mutual contact, Sophie discreetly reached out to Maria Stone, proposing a compromise. A formal academic panel with representation from multiple reputable universities, a set timeline for research, after which the findings would be published openly. Maria responded politely, neither accepting nor declining, promising to relay the proposal to her employers. And so the fate of the James Parchment hovered in limbo. It was out of their hands, whisked away by the invisible machinery of wealth and influence. Yet the puzzle was not entirely lost. Sophie, Richard, Hadia, and others still held precious documentation. The world might yet learn the secrets of that ancient text, whether it was an explosive challenge to traditional Christian narratives or simply another facet of the tangled tapestry of early church history. For now, one thing was certain. The parchment was real. And if it was a forgery, it was so brilliant that even the best tests could not detect it, a testament to the cunning complexities of the antiquities world. but everything pointed to authenticity, leaving the final verdict to the silent words of James, the brother of Jesus, scrawled on fragile papyrus nearly 2,000 years ago. Episode 6. Echoes of Doubt and Hope. Chapter 1. A Scholar's Determination. A few months later, Sophie Ashton sat in her London flat, piles of books and notes scattered across the living room. The city's winter gloom pressed at the windows, but inside she was warmed by the bright glow of her desk lamp. She sipped tea, revisiting the scanned images of the manuscript, cross-referencing them with known 1st and 2nd century texts. She had published a cautiously worded article in an academic journal referencing a newly discovered Aramaic fragment possibly linked to James the Just. She withheld identifying details about the provenance, but included some paleographic evidence. The article had stirred controversy in biblical scholarship circles. Some called it a forgery, others hailed it as a potential milestone. Trinitas Holdings had not blocked her publication outright, surprisingly. Perhaps they were content with her measured tone, or perhaps they bided their time, trusting she hadn't revealed too much. Either way, Sophie felt a measure of relief at having shared at least part of the text's existence. Correspondence poured in from scholars worldwide, each eager for more. Chapter 2. A Surprise Visitor. One cold afternoon, the doorbell rang. Sophie opened it to find a middle-aged man with a kind, lined face, dressed in a wool coat. His accent, when he spoke, had a slight Italian lilt. "Dr. Ashton," he said gently, "my name is Father Dario Rossi, from the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Culture. May I speak with you?" Sophie's heart skipped. "How did you find me?" He offered a mild smile. "I'm a researcher, not an inquisitor. We learned of your article. The Holy See is interested." She ushered him in, uncertain. He surveyed her cluttered living room with polite curiosity, noticing the computer screen showing the parchment scans. "Thank you. I assure you, I come in peace. The Church is not in the habit of silencing scholars, but we do have an interest in verifying or refuting claims that might impact Christian doctrine." Sophie eased onto the sofa, gesturing for him to sit. "What is it you want to know?" He folded his hands, voice calm. "Is it true that this text, if genuine, suggests James opposed Paul's teachings more vehemently than the New Testament implies?" She nodded. "Yes, that's the gist." Father Dario sighed. That would raise theological debates about the unity of the apostolic mission. The Church has always recognized tensions in the early community, but if this document is from James himself, it might add new layers. She studied him. "Are you here to stop me from publishing more?" He shook his head, a faint smile. "On the contrary, we want to learn. The Vatican invests in biblical studies. If you can share your material with the Pontifical Commission for Sacred Archaeology, we can examine it thoroughly. The Church doesn't fear truth, only confusion and misinformation." Sophie was taken aback by his openness. "I can't hand over everything, Father. The original is out of my control, and I have agreements with certain parties. But I can share the images, my translations, and notes if we proceed respectfully." "That would be greatly appreciated." He paused, gauging her. "And you needn't fear censure. The Church's position is that historical inquiry ultimately illuminates our faith, not destroys it." It felt surprisingly genuine. Sophie tentatively agreed to collaborate with him. If the Vatican scholars recognized the text's potential, perhaps they'd join her in urging Trinitas to allow further public study. It was one more glimmer of hope in the labyrinth of secrets. Chapter 3. Unforeseen Allies. Word of Sophie's meeting with Father Dario spread quietly through academic circles. Soon, a coalition of biblical scholars, textual critics, and historians formed an informal working group around Sophie's partial publication, all seeking to verify the text's authenticity. Hadia Farouk joined in from Cairo, providing her papyrological expertise. Even some members of the Eastern Orthodox community expressed interest, given James's prominence in certain Orthodox traditions. Richard visited Sophie in London to lend his forensic eye. Together they pored over the high-resolution images, analyzing ink flow, letter shapes, and the presence of damage consistent with age. The more they studied it, the more convinced they became that the parchment was no modern forgery. Father Dario even arranged for a top Vatican manuscript expert, Monsignor Gianelli, to offer his input. Over Zoom sessions, Gianelli agreed the script matched first-century Aramaic conventions surprisingly well. Yet no one could finalize a conclusion without re-examining the physical parchment, still locked away in Trinitas's possession. Chapter 4. A Twist of Fate. Then, in a dramatic turn of events, Sophie received a cryptic email from an unknown address, signed only B. Lazarus. It read, "Dr. Ashton, you seek the James parchment. You deserve to know that Trinitas Holdings has placed it in a secure vault in Switzerland. However, certain upper-level management changes have occurred. The item is at risk of being sold again. If you wish to view it in person, come to Geneva. Discretion required. B. Lazarus." Sophie's pulse raced. She immediately showed Richard. "Another sale? Why?" Richard's eyes narrowed. Perhaps internal struggles at Trinitas, or they realized the text's political volatility. The question is, do we trust this Lazarus? They debated for hours. Ultimately, curiosity and the promise of direct access proved too strong. Sophie emailed back, requesting further details, disclaiming she had no funds to buy it. Lazarus replied, instructing her to come alone to a certain address in Geneva's old town. Despite the risks, she resolved to go, with Richard insisting on accompanying her for protection. They alerted Father Dario, who promptly offered Vatican diplomatic assistance if needed, but Sophie declined for the moment, unsure how official involvement might complicate matters. Chapter 5. The Final Enigma. In Geneva, the winter air was crisp, the lake glinting under a pale sun. Sophie and Richard navigated the narrow streets until they reached a discreet townhouse. A tall, slender man answered the door, introducing himself as Bernard Lazarus. He led them into a drawing room decorated with antiques. "You have the scans, the partial translations. Now you can see the real thing," he said quietly. From a locked cabinet, he produced a lead-sealed container. Opening it revealed the familiar wooden box. Inside lay the parchment, seemingly unharmed, carefully wrapped. Sophie's heart soared at the sight. "Why are you showing us this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lazarus exhaled. "The new leadership at Trinitas sees it as a liability. They plan to auction it off, quietly, but soon. I believe in scholarship. That's why I arranged this meeting. Perhaps if you can authenticate it conclusively here, you could muster the resources to purchase it legitimately or pressure them to make it public. One way or another, it needs to be freed from the shadows." Richard gave a wry smile. "We appreciate your moral stance, though it's ironic, given how it was obtained." Lazarus simply shrugged. "The antiquities trade is rarely pure, but knowledge should not be locked away. You have my help for now." Sophie spent hours examining the parchment anew, every crease and letter. The sense of awe she'd felt in Cairo returned tenfold. This was the real, tangible link to the earliest days of Christian history. Richard took samples with advanced portable equipment they'd borrowed from a Swiss lab. Everything reinforced their initial findings. It was ancient, consistent with a first-century date. By the end, they were convinced beyond all doubt. It was authentic. The potential to reshape scholarship was immense. As they parted ways, Lazarus confided, "Trinitas will soon announce a private sale. You have a small window to intervene, either by raising funds or by rallying major institutions. Good luck." With that, they left the townhouse, hearts pounding. The text that could rock Christian history remained in limbo, flickering in and out of public reach like a will-o'-the-wisp. But armed with renewed certainty and new alliances, Sophie and Richard resolved not to let it slip away again. Epilogue. The mystery endures. Days later, Sophie, Richard, Father Dario, and a handful of prominent scholars convened an emergency conference call. The plan: form a coalition of museums, universities, and possibly the Vatican to place a joint offer on the James Parchment, both to secure its authenticity publicly and to ensure the entire world could study its contents. Whether they could match the clandestine billions of the private market was uncertain. Yet they had to try. And if they failed, Sophie vowed to release every image, every translation, every scrap of analysis into the public domain. The text might vanish physically, but its words would echo across the globe, igniting debates, fueling research, and inspiring faith or skepticism in equal measure. The controversy over whether James truly condemned Paul would rage on, stirring the embers of theological dispute. But the conversation itself would be priceless, proof that ancient voices still speak and that truth cannot be forever stifled by money or power. In the end, the parchment's authenticity remained, for some, an open question. Others believed wholeheartedly in its genuineness, and so the world was left with a thrilling enigma at the intersection of faith, history, and commerce, one that might never be fully resolved. Yet, in that unresolved space, scholarly inquiry thrived, new perspectives emerged, and the quest for understanding continued. As for Sophie and Richard, their partnership, both professional and personal, grew stronger in the crucible of these events. They returned to their travels and studies, waiting for the next development, knowing that the James Parchment story was far from over. Somewhere in a Swiss vault, or perhaps already moved to another hidden location, the ancient papyrus bore silent witness to one of the great enigmas of Christian origins, an artifact as elusive and captivating as the land of Egypt itself. Author's note: this 6-episode detective mystery set in Egypt showcases the clandestine world of antiquities trading and the profound theological implications of discovering a new text, possibly written by James, the brother of Jesus, one that challenges the mainstream narrative about Paul. The story remains balanced between the possibility of authenticity and the fear of forgery, capturing the tension of modern scholarship and the high-stakes environment in which such artifacts often change hands. While the parchment's final fate is uncertain, its existence spurs the protagonist scholars to defend knowledge and truth against secrecy, profit, and manipulation, echoing the timeless struggle for genuine historical understanding.